crazy how quickly the NFL season moves. Okay, I'm just like looking at data for this week. I initially looked at everything from week 8 because I was thinking it was week 9 still, and then it was, oh god, I had to redo everything. Look at week 9 stuff. Yeah.
I mean, if you think about it, the NBA has played the same amount of games as NFL right now. You know, like each team has played, 8 or 9 games.
I thought about it that way.
What is happening, everybody? It is Saturday afternoon, which means Neil Orfield and I breaking down week 10 of the NFL slate. So we are exactly halfway through the NFL season, and we're about to approach the second half of the year. And if you guys are not familiar with the show, here's what Neil and I do. Every Saturday afternoon, we look at the DraftKings and FanDuel slate, and we break down everything that you guys need to know from a tournament perspective. We go over our core plays at each position, the value options that we like, some of the lower-owned plays that we might like, and the only thing we ask for you in return is just simply like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. We're sponsored by DraftKings Rainmakers here, and I don't know if you saw this, Neil. Before Thanksgiving, Rainmakers, there's going to be a $1 million first contest, a Millie Maker for Rainmakers. So if you guys are interested in winning $1 million, go check out DraftKings Rainmakers. There's a free starters pack that you could claim below. You can win actual cash prize with it. And then starting next week, there's going to be a pack drop where you're going to get cards that can be used for the Millie Maker contest. There's also going to be a Christmas exclusive contest. So these cards are going to be good for the rest of the year, but you need these exclusive cards also to get in on these Millie Maker contests. So go check that out. And starting Monday, there's going to be a pack drop for these cards. And if you buy 3 packs, you are going to get $50 back in DK bucks. So go check that out. Rainmakers, $1 million contest happening next week. Neil, one thing that I was kind of interested to ask you, and we're, like I said, halfway through the season, about to start the second half. What would you say is the player that you have been most correct about that's helped you the most in the first half of the season? And then conversely, who have you been most wrong about that's hurt you the most?
Oh man, this is a tough question. I feel like Rashid Shaheed probably is the player that I've been the most right about, or it's paid off the most to be right about him, because I've been on him multiple weeks where he's been like under 1% owned and he's done really well. So I think that it's probably Rashid Shaheed that I've been the most right on. The most wrong, that's a really interesting one, because I've been pretty wrong on a lot of players. Maybe Bijan Robinson is a guy that I've gone back to several times and he's just never really done anything for me. Probably Chat could help me out here with players that I've gotten wrong several times. Malevolent Elephant just said Bijan most wrong for everybody. Yeah, that is definitely one that I've been going back to over and over, and I have been wrong about over and over. I'll have to think harder. Do you have a good answer for this one, Greg?
So the player that I've been most right on, this was like right out of the gates. If you remember week 1, Neil, you and I were trying to figure out what to make of the Rams wide receiving options. And who did you think of?
I was thinking you were going to bring up Calvin Ridley, because he's another guy that you were like right away. You weren't a huge believer in Calvin Ridley, and I was, and I have gone back to him several times, and it has not worked out for me. So there's another one that I've been wrong on several times that you've been right on throughout the year.
Yeah, I've hardly played Calvin Ridley at all this season, and it sucked in week 1 because he had a really big game, and it has been good basically every week since then because Calvin Ridley has generally sucked. He had one other big game, but I think it was a London game, if I remember correctly, where it didn't even matter. So not the player, though. The one that's actually benefited me the most this year. If you remember week 1, Neil, you and I were looking at the Rams receiving core, and we're trying to figure out, like, all right, what are we going to make of this? There's no Cooper Kupp. Almost everybody is min-price. Puka Nacua week 1 was both you and I, we like Tutu Atwell and Puka Nacua week 1. Neither of them were popular. I think they reached 1% owned to like min price. That I'm going to call our biggest win of the years. We were on Nacua from week 1. And how crazy it would be now to think that Nacua to open up the season was 1% owned in the Millie Maker at min price on DK.
Yeah, and has just absolutely crushed all year. We unfortunately we can't play him this week with the Rams on bye, but yeah, that's a good call out for sure. Puka Nacua, somebody that nobody was really on coming into the year. It took me a few weeks before a couple weeks. I think I bought in earlier than most on Puka Nacua, just because looking at some of the underlying metrics, he looked like a stud. But yeah, that was a good call pretty early on. You also, of course, just like nailed the absolute nut stack a couple weeks back with the Cowboys. So like just getting one thing extremely right can offset everything. I almost got there last week. I talked about CJ Stroud double stacks in every piece of content I did last week, I think. However, I always included Nico Collins in that conversation. He was always like the number one pass catcher there for me. So I was close to the nuts last week, but didn't quite get there.
And Collins wasn't bad. He was just not
Yeah.
like the necessary part of the stack. So if you looked at like all of the top performing lineups last week, they were Houston Texans triple stacks, but not with Nico Collins. It was with Tank Dell, Noah Brown, and Dalton Schultz. I'm pretty sure that was the triple stack.
Yep.
Ended up winning tournaments. And then there was a run back in it as well with Cade Otton. I think it was a double tight end lineup. I could be remembering incorrectly, but I know at least a couple of lineups ended up taking down tournaments with that. Player I've been most wrong on is a player who, when we get to wide receivers, I'll be talking about again. I have played so much of Keenan Allen this year ever since Mike Williams got hurt. Yeah. And he's not been terrible in a lot of these games, but he hasn't been worth his salary. So like last week, 16 fantasy points the week before, 5 against KC, only 9. Somehow Keenan Allen was just a monster when Mike Williams was healthy. And then as soon as Mike Williams got hurt, Keenan Allen just like evaporated.
Yeah, no, it's been weird. They have had a lot of tough matchups. Kind of another tough matchup this week against the Lions, so maybe it continues. But I think it's largely matchup based. I think he's just been kind of going through a tough string here. But yeah, it's been, especially because the first week Mike Williams got hurt in the middle of the game against the Vikings, and Keenan Allen was just targeted like every single pass the rest of the game. So it was like, okay, this is what we have now. Keenan Allen's going to be just a target monster, and it hasn't really paid off in the way that we have expected. So yeah, that's a good call out.
And now let's get into this by starting to talk about the quarterbacks. We start breaking down the slate and looking at each position. And I have a very tight pool of quarterbacks this weekend. I've been building lineups through the Sims for both FanDuel and DraftKings. I'm getting to the same, just only 3 quarterbacks. So I have really liked having you guess who it is that I'm getting to. And then we'll start to break it down. But also wanted to shout out to Stewie Griffin in the YouTube chat, who said that he's been most right on ETN, most wrong on Tony Pollard. You know what's annoying about Tony Pollard, and he's also going to be an important talking point this week, is whenever I'm breaking down the slate, I'm always like, I don't really like Tony Pollard. How many times have I said that? I think he's kind of washed. But then I end up building lineups on Sunday. It's like, crap, I'm kind of getting to some of Tony Pollard. I think there's going to be another one of these slates again this weekend. But starting with quarterbacks, Neil, I only have 3 quarterbacks. This applies to both FanDuel and DraftKings that I've double-digit exposure to right now. This is the tightest quarterback pool that I've had of the entire year. Can you guess which 3 quarterbacks it is that almost all my lineups are being built around?
Jared Goff.
Not Jared Goff.
Not Jared Goff. Man, I'm looking at the top stacks, so he looks pretty juicy. Is it Justin Herbert?
Not Justin Herbert.
Oh man, I'm having a rough game today. Joe Burrow.
Joe Burrow is my most rostered quarterback by a lot on both FanDuel and DraftKings. So Joe Burrow, my top 150 lineups have 40% of Joe Burrow on FanDuel and right about 30% on DK as of now.
All right, that was a kind of an easy one. I should have just led with Joe Burrow. Geno Smith.
Geno Smith is in there as well. You are 2 for 4 now, so your batting average is back up to respectable levels.
Are you going back to CJ Stroud?
Not CJ Stroud.
Oh, I can still get to 500 though. I can get to 500 here. If I get this one right, I'm going to go with, it's not that, I'll go with Brock Purdy.
So the answer is Dak Prescott. We'll talk more about this as we go here. There is a lot of upside and downside to Cowboys onslaught stacks this weekend, because that Giants team, in my opinion, the Giants are currently the worst team in football. And it's really hard to put numbers to it, because the Giants offense has not had Tommy DeVito as the quarterback for the entire year. And Tommy DeVito, you can break down everyone. The worst quarterback in the NFL is either Tommy DeVito or Bryce Young right now. And it's unfortunate that Bryce Young was the number 1 overall pick in the draft and that CJ Stroud was picked behind him. And this is what the conversation is. Now, it doesn't mean that Bryce Young is going to remain terrible for the entire season, but as of right now, fairly terrible, Bryce Young. So we've got this matchup, the Cowboys going up against the Giants. Giants just being a disaster, train wreck of a team. And we saw in week 1, Cowboys played the Giants. Cowboys ended up winning that game by 40 points. The Cowboys basically didn't have to do anything in the second half. So we saw really depressed stats, although, Tony Pollard was pretty good in that game. It was the only game he scored over 20 fantasy points the entire season, I'm pretty sure. But there is going to be, in my opinion, a ton of drives that start around midfield for the Cowboys. I think they are constantly going to have really good field position in this game. And what you're hoping for is that is the offense that scores touchdowns in this game as opposed to the defense, which happened in week one. The defense scored 2 touchdowns, which was a main reason. So the offense is never on the field. Cowboys defense scores 2 touchdowns. Starters don't really have to play much in the second half. But this is a game where the Cowboys can absolutely steamroll the Giants and put up like 30, 40 points on the board. And that's why the Sims are giving me a lot of these lineups, which is like Dak Prescott, Tony Pollard, CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, double, triple stacks over the Cowboys. So I really, really like Cowboy stacks, but as onslaught stacks. Like I don't want anything as a run back from the Giants.
Yeah, it'd be hard to find a run back that you really want from the Jets. I guess you could do Saquon Barkley if you really wanted to, but yeah, I mean, the Cowboys, they look really strong. We've got them a 10% chance of being the top stack on the slate. Part of me is just like, are they just going to run all over the Giants? I don't know. It's a little bit of a tough game script to predict, but we have seen we have seen CeeDee Lamb going off recently. It's just been the Dak to CeeDee has been a really fun connection there. So yeah, hard not to really have some interest in the Dallas stack. My biggest concern is that it's just going to get so chalky because it's so obvious. And also, I guess the blowout concern, obviously, not that often you see a spread this large in an NFL game. So there are warts on the play, but usually you don't have to worry that much about blowouts in the NFL. I only really start worrying about them when they get like players get extremely chalky, particularly passing games. And here we don't have Dak all of that chalky. So I imagine I'm going to have a good amount of Dak as well.
Yeah, and I mean, you look at him right now, he is projected for single-digit ownership over on FanDuel, so it's not like he's crazy popular over there. And then on DraftKings as well, he's projected for double-digit ownership, but it's 10% flat. So it's like you are barely getting him to double-digit ownership there. And also how I'm thinking about combining them, the Cowboys players, is going to be onslaught stack. So this isn't a situation where it's like, hey, I'm just going Prescott, CeeDee Lamb. Like that's going to be a very popular combination. I don't know how often people are going to be double, triple stacking the Dallas Cowboys. And this is that sort of game I could really see Dallas running over the Giants. Is there any other quarterbacks that are really important to you, which I assume there's going to be some of them, but for me, said right now, my lineups, just Joe Burrow, Geno Smith, Dak Prescott as a core. Maybe more players get ruled out. And as we get some projection and ownership updates tomorrow, maybe other quarterbacks enter the mix for me, but I'm pretty tight right now. Are there any quarterbacks you are really liking that you would consider core plays at the position this weekend?
I think Geno might end up being a core play. Sorry, for me this week. He is getting about 10% ownership, but just against that Commanders defense that is so bad, and then traded away Chase Young and Montez Sweat. Who knows? Maybe they just run all over Washington at this point because it used to be more of a pass funnel defense, but then they got rid of, as I said, those 2 defenders that maybe it's less of a pass funnel than it used to be, and Seattle can just run all over them. But I'm going to be taking some shots on Geno just because that Commanders defense is so bad. And, you kind of have just 3 receivers that you really want to go to in Seattle. All being pretty solid options in Lockett, Metcalf, and JSN. So a lot to like about Geno. I would say this week he'll be a core play for me. Jared Goff is going to be against this Chargers team. We've got him projected for just 6% ownership with a 10% chance of being the top stack. I think that's a game that clearly has probably the biggest blow up potential on the slate. Just both teams have the ability to put up 30 points, real life points. So it wouldn't be that shocking to see that game go completely off. So I do like the Goff side of it. I think the Herbert side of it is fine. Also, obviously a tougher matchup with Detroit, much easier for Goff there. But if the game goes off, it's probably not gonna be a huge impact there. It's probably going to be both teams, or obviously that would be both teams going off. So I like Herbert at 2% ownership that we haven't projected at right now. My guess is that that's going to change by game time. 2% seems low for Herbert in a game where they have a really high implied total, but both sides of that game I think are interesting. Could go back to Stroud again. I wouldn't say he's a core component. The other quarterback that I really wanted to shout out here is Brock Purdy. I think is pretty interesting, and part of it is just because of the way the Jaguars have been forcing teams to pass on them this year, which is different than most defenses approach it. And this is a tidbit I picked up from Hayden Winks at Underdog, pointed out that the defensive coordinator for the Jaguars a few weeks back, and they just had their bye week. So this is prior to their bye week. He says, we emphasize stopping the run we want to make offenses one-dimensional and take away the run game and make them throw the ball. And they are, in fact, number one. The defense is number one in neutral pass rate allowed. So that's really interesting to me, because it's normally I don't look at the Jaguars as a defense that I want to attack, but they're forcing teams to pass the ball on them. You have to imagine they're going to really try to force the Niners to pass on them rather than letting Christian McCaffrey run all over them. So I think they're just going to allow for a lot of downfield passes. And that makes me kind of interested in Brock Purdy and Niners stacks, really interested in Brock Purdy and Niners stats against the Jaguars. And we have it as a positive leverage stack as well there. We have, I mean, very little, but like 6.7% ownership, 7.1% chance to be in the top stack. Obviously, that's not a huge positive leverage there, but all factors considered, it's not, something that I look at initially, and I think I really want to play Brock Purdy in that game, but I think that sort of is an interesting spot for me if the Jaguars are going to be forcing them to throw the ball.
Yeah, and but you mentioned Geno Smith. Geno Smith also, I mean, he was in my core three of quarterbacks. So, I mean, these are the three guys that I really do like building around: Burrow, Smith, Prescott. Now, it's not 100% of my lineups that are made up of these three. So there are a couple of contrarian spots that I'm taking as well. Now, nobody that's double-digit owned in my lineups or anything. But here's a player that's going to be contrarian at quarterback that I'm interested in building stacks around, more so for DraftKings than FanDuel, though he does apply to both sites, and I'm slightly overweight to the field on him. What is your expectation for Kyler Murray this weekend, Neil? Because nobody's playing him, and we know there's an actual ceiling there with Kyler Murray. There's a point in time not all that long ago, you forget about because you've been hurt this year. Kyler Murray, to start last year, was considered one of the best fantasy quarterbacks in all of the NFL. And now we're opening up Kyler Murray season, second half of the NFL year. He's $5,900 on DraftKings. Nobody's playing him. He's a little more expensive on FanDuel at $7,500. Kyler Murray is never available at this price point. Kyler Murray is almost never available at only 3% ownership. Now, the reason he's only a tournament play and the reason that I don't want to go out and play like 15% of Kyler Murray or anything is, he's coming off the layoff. What is that going to mean for his rushing upside? It's very dubious, but I know there's potential for it. And if nobody's going to play Kyler Murray at this cheap of a price point, I don't imagine we're ever going to get a point where Kyler Murray going forward is this cheap and this unowned at any other point again.
No, I actually think that's a really good point. Kyler Murray is a really strong looking quarterback. Doesn't stand out in the top stacks tool as a great play, but also sort of hard to find the range of outcomes for a player that has not yet played. So like that, who knows what exactly we are factoring in there for Kyler. Like he's over Clayton too, and clearly an enormous step up. And they're facing a Falcons defense ranked 28th in terms of pass DVOA, very little ownership. Yeah, I think that's a really good call out. Not somebody that I like initially look at and think I really want to play a lot of Kyler Murray, but I think that's a really strong point, and that he is a really strong play on this slate. And we have him at low enough ownership that I actually imagine I'm probably going to be overweight to the 5% we have the field at right now. I think that's a really strong call out. I do want to say the only other game that I would call out is that Tennessee Tampa Bay game. Like there's obvious fireworks potential in that one. Will Levis, somebody who has shown that he might be actually a good NFL quarterback. Obviously a small sample size for Will Levis, but I think that's a game that you could consider stacking up there for that Tampa Bay and Tennessee game, particularly with, and the Buccaneer side of it, just the Titans have been such a pass funnel all year. We've seen some wide receivers just go off against the Titans. So that's another game that you could think about. Maybe not a core play for me, but I'll have some exposure to Titans Bucks.
Yeah. And people in chat saying, who knows how he's going to look. That's kind of the point, is we don't know.
Yeah.
But the field is assuming as if he's going to be dog shit, because when Kyler Murray is one of the cheapest quarterbacks on the slate and nobody's playing him really, I think that really speaks to the field saying like, hey, we don't think this guy is going to be any good, because for reference, he is all right. So I'll pull up some DraftKings pricing here and see who is somebody who's like in the price range of Kyler Murray. So we have Derek Carr, for instance, who, also priced similarly to Kyler Murray. Field also isn't playing him, but like that's the exact same guy that he's being compared to, is like a Derek Carr. Now I know there's been individual spots that we played Carr this year, but let's see who else. So like 5,900. We also have Brock Purdy is around the same price point. He's going to be more popular. Jared Goff around the same price point. He's a lot more popular. Geno Smith, a lot more popular. And this is somebody who historically, there's been a lot more fantasy upside in Kyler Murray. So just because of the ceiling and the low ownership, I think this is a good opportunity to take chances on him. Anything else that stands out to you at QB?
I'm just debating whether I have interest in Lamar Jackson. It's such a tough spot. Like that game, two of the best defenses in the NFL in that game, but he obviously Lamar has been just a guy who can get it done against any defense. We had the week against the Lions. Like the Lions, a pretty solid defense. Lamar went completely off. Now we've seen him back-to-back games against defenses that he should have been able to attack and really put up a lot of fantasy points. So in a matchup that should be kind of a dogfight there with the Browns, 1.2% ownership going to Lamar. I'm not going to go crazy there, but I do think that like I want to take some shots on Lamar despite the back-to-back duds, like in a game that it could be a good fight all game, in which case maybe Lamar runs a little bit more. Maybe they use Lamar a little bit more rather than going to the running back. So I sort of have interest in Lamar in a gross matchup with Cleveland. I don't think I'm going to the other side. I don't think I'm going to Deshaun Watson, but I could see myself, I'm probably going to be above the 1% expected ownership that we have on Lamar.
All right, so let's move on over to the running backs then. And my general builds for this weekend, Neil, how I'm looking at it right now. I'm going mid-range at running back and paying up for wide receivers. So there is one value wide receiver I like quite a bit that we'll talk about in a little bit. The opportunity cost of that means I am not paying up for the expensive running backs on the slate. So I am not getting to Christian McCaffrey nearly as much as the field. McCaffrey is projected for double-digit ownership. I only got him in 3% of my initial run of lineups. I'm not really getting to Austin Eckler, not getting Dalvin Kamara, not getting to Saquon Barkley. Do you see any differently with the high end of running back? Because I think there are so many stud wide receivers that look good, and there's so many good mid-range running backs that I can't find the salary to get all the way up to like a Christian McCaffrey, who's $9,200 on DraftKings, and on FanDuel even more expensive. He's $10,500 on FanDuel. Like, these are exorbitant price tags. And while I understand why people want to play Christian McCaffrey, he's Christian McCaffrey. I don't think this is the best place to spend my salary this weekend, but maybe you feel differently.
No, I think that I'm with you on Christian McCaffrey. He looks fine in the boom bust tool. We do have him at 12.6% ownership, 12.8% chance being optimal. I might include him in some of my Brock Purdy stacks. Like I think they're Purdy being sort of inexpensive. You can fit in McCaffrey with him, and that's he's obviously very involved in the passing game. So maybe I'll include him in some of my Brock Purdy, but I imagine I'll be underweight to the 13% we have the field at. Not really interested in Austin Eckler against that Lions defense. Don't think I'll get there a ton. Not really interested in Kamara against the Vikings. Saquon against the Cowboys. Yeah, you're right. These are just ugly across the board here. Maybe I'll have some Derrick Henry just because he's Derrick Henry coming in at sub 5% ownership. And maybe is this like kind of the start of the mid-range for you? Tony Pollard is another guy that I imagine, yeah, I'm going to have some Tony Pollard against the Cardinals. Are you including him as a pay-up option, or is that kind of where the mid-range starts for you?
Yeah, so for me, Tony Pollard is where the mid-range starts. He's my most expensive running back that I have double-digit exposure to, and I've really tried to not play Tony Pollard this year. I don't think he's the same running back now as he was prior to the leg injury last year. The problem is this matchup is so perfect on paper, and Tony Pollard, because he has struggled so much from a fantasy perspective, like we haven't seen him have a good fantasy game since week 1 when the Cowboys also played the Giants. I mean, I guess week 2 he was decent against the Jets, but we haven't really seen the touchdowns for Tony Pollard. I don't even think he's scored a rushing touchdown since that game against the Giants in week 1. And the reason that I would go to Pollard here actually is less to do about Pollard himself, who I don't really love as a running back talent at this point in his career, but more so because of the game script. The Cowboys are 17-point favorites against the Giants. If there's any spot that it favors Dallas to really be pounding the ball on the ground in the second half, this is going to be the one. And also, if they're trying to build some confidence in Tony Pollard and get him going a little bit, this is the spot where you could get him those touches and really build up his confidence, maybe get him into more of a rhythm in the second half of the year. I know it's a little bit narrative driven, but he still does project out pretty well for us. Tony Pollard, I'm not going to be all that different from the field on him, but he is somebody who, if you have the salary to spend up a little bit of running back, he's the guy that makes the most sense to me in this kind of price range.
Yeah, I'm with you. And the tools are with you too. 18% projected ownership, 20% chance of being optimal. Honestly, in NFL, I'm more willing to get narrative driven. Like we still rely on data for like 98% of our analysis, but I'm willing to get a little bit narrative driven from time to time in NFL. And I think that is a fine narrative that, like, yeah, maybe they want to get their star player going who they paid a lot of money to, and he's been having a bad year. Maybe they try to get him jump started. So yeah, Tony Pollard makes a lot of sense to me, regardless of the narrative. Just at 18% ownership, 20% chance of being optimal, one of the best spots you can have against this Cardinals defense that is just awful, and the Cowboys should be just able to crush them throughout the game. The Giants defense, not the Cardinals defense, but same analysis. One of the worst defenses out there, should be an easy spot for Tony Pollard to get going. So I like that call out quite a bit with this, what is it, a 17-point spread? Just insane to see a spread this large in an NFL game. So yeah, Tony Pollard, just stands out as a kind of a no-brainer play, but the field sees it too. I'm actually surprised to see that he's only getting 18% ownership. I would have expected it to be a little bit higher, but we have some positive leverage. Hard not to like it.
I wonder how many people will look at the 39.5 point total and just say, I don't want
Right.
to make
Skip that game.
onslaught stacks. It's expected to be low scoring. Here's the reality though. The Cowboys have one of the highest team totals on the entire slate. It's because the Giants are expected to score no points that the total is so low. The Cowboys being 17-point favorites and the total in this game is 39.5. The Cowboys have a team total of over under 28 points. It's the Giants who on the other end have a team total of 11 points expected. So the Cowboys are expected to score a bunch. It's just the total's low because the Giants aren't expected to do anything, which totally makes sense to me. So Tony Pollard, I like getting to him. Not all that much different from the field, but I think that he's warranted. And this is going to be a slate where I could certainly back him a little bit. As we get to go cheaper, though, I don't have anybody else who's priced above 7K on DK that have any kind of meaningful exposure to. FanDuel's a little bit different because we do have Joe Mixon at $7,700, and he's the next guy that I get to. Joe Mixon at $7,700 on DK. On FanDuel, he's only $6,200. Joe Mixon is going to be a very, very popular running back this weekend for a couple of reasons. First off, we got the extra usage in the passing game available because T. Higgins is out. We also got a pretty good matchup for him going up against the Houston Texans in a game environment that should be very high scoring. Total in this game is 47. That is the second highest of the entire slate. And the Bengals moving the ball better now as an offense because Joe Burrow is finally healthy. So, Neil, Joe Mixon projects really well, but as such, the field is getting there. Do you like him more than the field, less than the field, or about the same as the field, where Joe Mixon is projected to be about a quarter of the field's lineups?
So we have positive leverage in the boom bust tool. So usually I just trust the tools in this spot. I don't think that I'm going to be above weight to the field on Joe Mixon just because of he is such chalk. Like you do want to rely on the tools, and the tools say 27% projected ownership, 31% chance to be an optimal. So we do have some nice positive leverage there. I'm torn about whether I'm going to be. My guess is that I come in a little bit underweight to the field despite the positive leverage. This is the rare spot where I see great leverage, and I don't know. I think it's a personal bias for me against Joe Mixon. Like I think he's just burned me too many times. I don't fully trust him. So when he's chalk, I can't get myself to like really go nuts there. The price tag is obviously great. The matchup is obviously great for Mixon against this Texans defense. My guess is I come in a little bit underweight there. What about you?
Yeah, so I'm overweight to Joe Mixon. Part of it too is because our boom bust tool, it's built on simulations. And
Right.
obviously our Sims tool is based on simulation. So when I'm running stuff with all of our data, which is what I do to prepare the shows, I build lineups for FanDuel and DraftKings as if the slate was locking right at this time, which, it's a 1:00 Eastern time start time for the show, 1:00 on Sunday. So it's just like, hey, if this slate was locking 24 hours early, I try to build lineups using all the information that we know and try to give me lineups that would be, if the slate was locking right now, these are what my lineups would be. And Joe Mixon actually does pop up as my most rostered player on both FanDuel and DraftKings. I think he also makes sense as a part of Joe Burrow stacks. I don't have an issue with him being involved in them. He's capable of getting passing game work, and we could see more targets for him with the absence of T. Higgins. So Joe Mixon right now, chalky, but this is a chalk piece that I'm getting behind.
Yeah, I'm probably just outsmarting myself by not wanting to get to Joe Mixon because, like you said, like the tools love him. The tools are based on simulations. Like the tools are going to be over the long term, like just going to do me a lot better to trust the tools rather than trusting my instincts. So probably should be overweight to the field there. There are just some really contrarian running backs that I am going to be taking dart throws on that I think will lead to me being underweight to the field on Mixon, and it'll probably bite me, but I'm also playing extremely large field stuff where it's more beneficial to get off the beaten path.
So what is it that you are looking at? And by the way, is it somebody in the mid-range you're liking to pivot off of Mixon, or is just totally price range altogether?
So we have across all the price ranges, I have a lot of running backs that I'm a little bit interested in. Some of them are just completely disgusting dart throws that I'm going to say the names and people are going to be like, why the hell would you consider playing him? And it's only because I'm playing in contest with hundreds of thousands of people where it's just one of the easiest ways to get to the top is getting very different. But even in the mid range, we do have some running backs who I like, who are getting ownership, and I'm going to be playing some of them anyway. Like Bijan Robinson, I think this is. I'm actually surprised to see 15% ownership going to Bijan, given how bad he has been and how much people have been wanting to play him. He was in the winning Millie Maker lineup last week, by the way. But 6,000. He was
good, right? It means
he was obviously great. He made it into the winning Millie Maker lineup, so he must have been great. Utica somehow won the Millie by a lot with Bijan Robinson and the snowflake in there. But yeah, we've got him at 15% ownership. If he's ever going to do anything, this is obviously the week where you would expect him to against this Cardinals defense that is just horrible. The Falcons have a 23 implied team total, or right under 23 implied team total. Looks like a great spot for the Falcons. Maybe they finally get Bijan going against this Cardinals defense. I'll take some shots there. I was hoping he would be more contrarian, so I'm not really excited about the 15% ownership going there, but still somebody that I might take some shots on. James Conner, I think, is somebody you can consider even in your Kyler stacks. Like, he is pretty involved in the passing game historically. He's 5,900. Assuming he's a go, I'll have some interest in James Conner. Kyler's never been afraid to pass to him. I think this is somebody in chat just called out Rachaad White as an interesting play, and I agree. Like, he is pretty interesting here, as the guru in chat says. I like White again because Tennessee hasn't been the same against the run since week 5. 193, 139, 149, and 166 yards allowed. Yeah, they have, I don't know what has happened there to Tennessee, but they have given up some really big games to running backs. The other thing about Rachaad White is he's just so involved as a pass catcher that he doesn't necessarily need to have a great game just as a pure rusher, because he can pick up some PPR points there. So I think he is an interesting play there. Not sure what I'm going to do with Jaylen Warren and Najee Harris. I think both are fine plays at around that 5K price point. We do have more ownership going to Najee Harris, 10% ownership going to Harris, 5% going to Jaylen Warren. We also have positive leverage on Najee Harris and negative leverage on Warren. Najee Harris still has been the lead back in recent games, and he's, for whatever reason, Warren has actually passed him in terms of price tag. So I think Najee is kind of interesting. I might a little bit of interest still in Warren, but I prefer Najee of the two of them. We kind of we didn't bring up the Lions running back situation. Like, it's hard to not have some interest in Jahmyr Gibbs or David Montgomery. I don't think I'm going to be playing. I won't be playing both of them in the same lineup, but in alternating lineups at relatively low ownership, we've got Gibbs at just 3% ownership, Montgomery at 2%. It's hard to really know like what's going to happen with that backfield going forward. Dan Campbell has said Jahmyr Gibbs has earned a bigger role than he had earlier in the year, but I still think he loves David Montgomery as that, goal line back, just the bruiser back. So hard to know exactly how the split is going to break down, but just because that is a game with a really high implied team total against a bad Chargers defense, I feel like both are very squarely in play, and we have them at low enough ownership that I'll probably be above weight to each of them, at least slightly. I'll probably still have single digit ownership, to be clear, to both of Montgomery and Gibbs, but since we have Gibbs at 3%, Montgomery at 2%, I think that I'll probably end up above weight to both of them. And then as far as the really ugly plays that I have some interest in, Rico Dowdle is a guy that, maybe like, so there is clearly not in Tony Pollard lineups, but in lineups where I'm not playing Tony Pollard, if we don't want to make the assumption that they're going to try to get Tony Pollard going, maybe they're just running the clock out with Rico Dowdle. He's 4,300. And obviously he has great contingent value. Like, if anything happens to Pollard, and if Pollard goes down, like, Rico Dowdle is suddenly going to be 4,300, great leverage off one of the chalkiest running backs on the slate. And he would be the lead back in a game where they're favored by 17 against a very bad Giants defense. So he's just a galaxy brain dart throw play that I'm going to be playing a bit of. I'm actually surprised to see that we have him at 0.5%. Like, that's more ownership than I would have expected for Rico Dowdle, because he's like, it's really just a narrative driven dart throw kind of play. But looking at last week, he played 14 snaps. So like, he's a little bit involved anyway. Could on, one of his 4 carries in the game, that could be enough for Rico Dowdle to break one off against this defense. But I do like that there is contingent value as well, both in terms of Pollard could get hurt, or just they could be up by 3 touchdowns in the third quarter and just decide, hey, you know what, let's give it to Rico Dowdle, not risk getting Pollard hurt. So sort of think Rico Dowdle is an interesting just galaxy brain play here. Similarly, I mean, Tyler Algier is a similar play. I talked about how I like Bijan a bit. We have Tyler Algier projected for 1% ownership, 2% chance to be an optimal. So he actually looks really solid in the tools. Nice spot for against that Cardinals defense. So I think Tyler Algier is a strong play here. And then I'm sort of thinking about these Seattle running backs. So Kenneth Walker is 6,800. We haven't projected for 9% ownership, 7% chance to be an optimal. Talked about it when we were talking about Geno Smith. Like, they've been in a horrible defense all year. For most of the year, the Commanders have been better against the run than against the pass, but they just traded away Chase Young and Montez Sweat. they're just going to be an awful, awful defense. Seattle theoretically should be able to run all over them. And just looking at last week in terms of the split, we had, so Kenneth Walker, I said I have a little bit interest in. Zach Charbonnet is one that I have more interest in here, who Zach Charbonnet played 27 of the team's 47 snaps in week 9. That's a 57% snap share. Only had 4 carries to Kenneth Walker's 9 in that game. But he ran 16 routes in that game to Kenneth Walker's 11. At 4,200 in a matchup with that Commanders defense, I think Zach Charbonnet has some potential to completely blow up. And he actually looks really good in the boom bust 2.4% projected ownership, 3.8% chance to be an optimal. So a lot of kind of disgusting plays that I like on this slate. And I'm not going to go crazy. I'm not going to be playing 30% of these guys, but like, you don't need to go too crazy to be well above the field on these disgusting dart throw plays. So those are some of the running backs. I feel like I just named a lot. Do you have any reactions or anybody else you want to talk about?
I think you may have named every running back that was on every single team right there, but I'm trying to compartmentalize and think about which running backs you mentioned there, and then also which ones are important pieces to me. So you closed there by talking about the Seahawks running backs, and the issue that I have is I have so much exposure to the passing game of the Seahawks that really prohibits me from getting to the Seahawks running backs. I have Geno Smith as my second most rostered quarterback, only behind Joe Burrow. If I look at my wide receiver exposure, I have double-digit exposure, 12+% of all of Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and JSN, which that just makes it so that I'm limited in terms of the amount of the running backs I could get to from Seattle. I'm more focused on the passing game there. As for the running backs you mentioned that I'm also getting exposure to, Najee Harris, very cheap on both DraftKings and FanDuel, $6,500 on FanDuel, only $4,900 on DraftKings. And I know that he sucks. He's somebody who has been massively inefficient, but that's never really impacted his workload. The Steelers still give him as many touches as possible. And he's coming off a game where he was targeted 4 times and he also had 16 carries. So you're going to tell me a guy who we're expecting to get somewhere around 20 touches is only $4,900 on DraftKings? Think how many shitty running backs we play just because they're good points per dollar values because the starter might be out. Like, I think Najee Harris is underpriced and underowned. He's only projected for 10% ownership on this slate. I think he's a contrarian play that makes sense. I agree with you on that. And then another one that you had mentioned that I also like as a guy who we're projecting for some ownership right now, but I do think that it's going to end up being less than what it's projected for, assuming he plays. James Conner. If there is no kind of restrictions on James Conner, he played really well this year prior to getting hurt. If you remember at the beginning of the year, he was one of the top fantasy running backs in all of football. Then he gets hurt, and he was doing that with Josh Dobbs at quarterback and a Cardinals offense that was just not all that potent on paper. This should be a much better offense with Kyler Murray now under center. There's a lot of opportunity here for James Conner, also at a cheap price point on both DraftKings and FanDuel. And I know that he's projected for like 12% ownership for us right now. I don't think that's what the actual number is going to be as we get closer to lock. So James Conner, Najee Harris, those are 2 contrarian running backs that I like.
All right. So you like some of the same contrarian guys that I do at the very least.
Yeah, it's hard for me to get behind Rico Dowdle when I get he's projected for like no ownership, but at the same time too, he's in week 1 where the Giants just got absolutely torched by the Cowboys. He got 6 carries. And then it's like, all right, what is his legitimate upside at 6 carries? And is he actually going to be able to outscore, all the other running backs on the slate, which you kind of need to do in a large field tournament. So that's a little bit too thin for me, but I mean, I could see the path where the game just plays out exactly like the last one. And then maybe the Cowboys just end up giving Dowdle more of the touches. But those are the contrarian backs I'm looking at: Najee Harris and James Conner.
I like it. Those are strong options. You don't need to get fully galaxy brain like myself playing Rico Dowdle and Zach Charbonnet.
All right, so let's go ahead and look at the wide receivers then. And also, once again, guys, don't forget, next week, Millie Maker contest is going to be up over at DraftKings for Rainmakers, where if you guys want to get in on it, there's going to be a pack drop next week. You buy 3 packs and you are going to give you a $50 rebate in terms of DK dollars. So go check that out. Chance to win $1 million over on DraftKings. But let's look at the wide receivers. And like I mentioned, Neil, I am going cheapish at running back, which I think was kind of shown out before. And the only running back I have double-digit exposure to that's north of 7K is Tony Pollard. And then other running backs, I'm getting to like Joe Mixon, who's going to be chalky, but still fairly cheap, especially on DraftKings. The Najee Harris and James Conner is cheap options. So that enables me to spend up at wide receiver. Do you picture yourself also spending up a wide receiver more this weekend?
Yeah, I think so. Jamar Chase, obviously, he has to be good to go to play in this game, but it sounds like he's going to play in this one. No T. Higgins, and Jamar Chase has just been such a target monster whenever T. Higgins is out. We've got him at 20% ownership, 19% chance of being optimal, but I still think I'm probably going to about match the field there at the very least with Jamar Chase, just because the targets are just so condensed there. CeeDee Lamb, we talked about the DAX stacks. I'm going to have some DAX stacks. CeeDee Lamb is going to be a big part of those stacks. Looks good, 14% ownership, 16% chance of being optimal. He's going to be in a lot of my lineups. We don't have positive leverage on what maybe my favorite wide receiver play on the slate, or would be if we did. I wanted the tools to agree with me here, but Amon-Ra St. Brown against that Chargers defense, like, could just put up a massive score here at 8,300. We do have him at 21% ownership, 16% chance of being optimal, which, dampens my enthusiasm a little bit for Amon-Ra St. Brown, but he's still going to be a big part of my lineups. So yeah, I think I'm with you. They're even like Mike Evans, 7,200, talked about him against that Tennessee pass defense, looks pretty good. Brandon Ayuk, I talked about how I like. Brock Purdy, gonna be, yeah, it's hard not to like all of these expensive wide receivers. You can make a case really for all of them.
And I'm going to make a case for all of them because this is what the benefit is of me not paying up at running back really at all this weekend by having, 3% of Christian McCaffrey, my top 150 lineups on DraftKings and FanDuel. I am overweight, Neil, to all four of the pay up wide receivers. So we have four wide receivers, same four guys that are priced over 8K on FanDuel and DraftKings. Jamar Chase, Keenan Allen, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown. On both FanDuel and DraftKings, I'm overweight to all four. So that's where I'm doing my lineups. I'm going cheap and mid-range at running back, paying up for these wide receivers. I think all of them are in strong spots. In terms of order of exposure for me, I have the most of Jamar Chase, followed by CeeDee Lamb, then Keenan Allen, then Amon-Ra St. Brown. Those are the order of the four for me.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I think that's largely in line with what the tools would tell you to do also. Yeah, I think all four look great. I think Keenan Allen is the one that I have the least interest in, just because he is the most expensive. He has a tough matchup with Detroit, but obviously could be just getting peppered with targets here. And he's Keenan Allen. He's a talented receiver. Certainly could get there anyway.
Yeah, I mentioned before, he's the player I've probably been most wrong on this year, because how many slates does he look good, or just you assume he's going to be getting all these targets? And it doesn't make sense how he could have a game 20 targets against the Vikings. And that was a game with Mike Williams in. And the next game, Mike Williams is out and he gets targeted 5 times. So, some of it is teams are able to focus in more on Keenan Allen, but it's crazy that he just hasn't been able to get the same targets at this point in the season as he did earlier in the year when Mike Williams was healthy. But Keenan Allen, going back to him this week, as I am with all of the pay up wide receivers. Now, on the other end, and we'll talk about the mid-range after this, but there is one cheap wide receiver that I really like on this slate. There's one punt option that really stands out. Who do you think that is, Neil?
Trenton Irwin.
You are correct. So Trenton Irwin, I'm surprised that he's not projected to be chalk on this slate. He is projected for single-digit ownership on DraftKings, barely over 5% ownership projected for him. And then over on FanDuel, we have Trenton Irwin projected for also 7% ownership over on FanDuel for Irwin. He's the guy who I think is going to see the biggest uptick in playing time in the absence of T. Higgins. And he's so cheap. He's the Flatman 3K on DK. So if you're just looking to save salary, go really cheap and punt at wide receiver, I think this is a reasonable way to do it with a guy who's not expected to be popular.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, it's funny. We just saw T. Higgins finally go off in the last game, and now he's missing this one. Yeah, Trenton Irwin, of the wide receiver 3 options for Cincinnati. Obviously, Tyler Boyd now being the wide receiver 2 with Higgins out. Trenton Irwin, it wasn't a huge distinction there, but ran 7 routes last week to we had Andre Yoshevich just ran 2 routes. We expect Trenton Irwin to step in and be that wide receiver 3, and he'll earn some targets in a passing attack that we already like. Yeah, he makes a lot of sense. I'm also surprised. I would have expected him to be like, I don't know, 18-20% ownership. We've got him at just 7.7% projected ownership, 14.7% chance of being optimal. He is the min price. Hard not to have interest in Trenton Irwin.
Yeah, and people in the chat are saying that Irwin is going to be popular or he's getting talked. I mean, we'll see. If the ownership projections change by tomorrow, it could impact how I view him. But as of right now, he's expected to be contrarian. And I'm going to ride with what our projections are saying, because it's better than I could figure out how to project ownership. So Irwin does not look like he's going to be all that popular. He's a good piece of salary savings and really makes sense too to save money in a lineup where if you're going like Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Trenton Irwin, and going double stacks, an easy way to make the salary work. Is
Yeah,
there
good
anything
call.
else you're seeing at the cheap end at wide receiver that really stands out to you? If not, we'll talk about the mid range.
Yeah, these Arizona guys are a little bit interesting. I don't know if Michael Wilson is going to play. The last I saw, he was questionable to play, but he's 3,500. We have Michael Wilson currently projected for 5.8% ownership, 7.8% chance to be an option. So if he's a go, Michael Wilson as the only tall receiver. I guess they have Trey McBride has been going off too, but Michael Wilson, one of the few tall receivers, and Kyler Murray probably needs a tall receiver just to have somebody to throw it up to. So I do kind of like Michael Wilson. If he can't go, then maybe I'll take more shots on Rondale Moore. We've got more projected for 6% ownership, 4% chance to be an optimal. He's the stone min. Like with Kyler returning, he's just sort of interesting as a guy who used to be just a target monster whenever he played with Kyler. So maybe he becomes a target monster for Kyler once again. I prefer him if Michael Wilson is out. But I think those Arizona receivers are among the more interesting of the super cheap guys. Could go back to Noah Brown. He went off last week. We've got him at 9% ownership, 8% chance to be an optimal. He looks fine. Not somebody who's really standing out as somebody I love here. I'm trying to debate if I want to. Do I have any interest in Jameson Williams? Let me look at. He didn't play last week. I'd have to look at week 8 for Jameson Williams. I don't think that he's getting enough playing time to really be interesting. The only reason I'm thinking about it is because I'm like, well, I'm going to be playing Jared Goff stacks. Jameson Williams is 3,400. You can make a case for it. I don't know that I'll go there though. Michael Gallup, 3,500. Dak stacks looks fine. I don't know if I can play Wandale with DeVito in at quarterback. You say you can't?
No.
Yeah, that's ugly. Yeah, I think that's kind of I guess no, Michael Thomas is going to play now. I was going to think what would we do if he's out, but I think they say he's going to play. Yeah, I don't think there's that much that I love in terms of the super cheap receiver options.
Yeah, so for me, and you had mentioned him, but I like getting to Kyler Murray as a contrarian running back. I think Trey McBride's one of the best tight ends on this slate. And if we're looking at a cheap wide receiver to make doubles, very, very cheap double stack, Kyler Murray with Trey McBride when we talk about tight ends. And then also Rondale Moore, flat min, 3K over on DraftKings. Not really getting to him in my FanDuel lineups, but I am overweight to him on DK as another contrarian pass catching option. And then if we're going a little bit more expensive, there are ones like Tyler Boyd. I think he's very, very sensible with T. Higgins out. Tyler Boyd's likely going to be drawing extra targets. So I like getting to Tyler Boyd. And then JSN, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. If we're getting a little bit more expensive, those are the other ones who are making it into 15 to 20% of lineups for me.
Yeah, really interested in Jackson Smith and the Jigba. As we said, he's just a great matchup going up against the Commanders. And last week, 41% first read target share for Jackson Smith and Jigba. That was unexpected with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf there for JSN last week to get a 41% first read target share. Now that's just a 1-game sample size. There's probably nothing to it, but he's getting very little ownership in like the best matchup or one of the best matchups he could possibly be in. So I do have a lot of interest in 4,100 JSN. Maybe you could take your shots on Quentin Johnston. Robert Woods is back, and now we have Nico Collins out, so he's in play. Brandon Cooks in your Dallas stacks, I think makes some sense. He's definitely an option. You mentioned Tyler Boyd. Like Tyler Boyd is, another kind of obvious one with T. Higgins out. Like he hasn't always hit when T. Higgins is out, but he's had some of those big games. So I like that call as well.
And then anything else like on that cheaper end that's any kind of priority? If not, we'll talk. And I know we kind of worked in a weird order where it was like studs, value options. But for me, I mean, that's really what's like most key to my wide receiver exposure. Then there's the other guys in between that I'm getting some of. But for me, really the core of my wide receiver, it's stars and scrubs. We talk about that more typically as a build in like basketball. But for NFL this week, and that's what my wide receiver exposure looks like. In the mid-range, the guys that I'm getting to the most of, it's Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, also just correlating with Geno Smith. And then DeAndre Hopkins as well. I think Levis is legit, and Hopkins is still fairly cheap. He's only 6K over on DK on FanDuel. He is priced at, let's see, what was that price point? $7,100. We saw a couple of weeks ago, Nuke goes out, 6 targets, 4 catches, 128 yards, 3 touchdowns. There's clear big play upside. So Hopkins, modest ownership in like that mid-range price. Those are the mid-range guys that I'm getting to.
Yeah, I like Hopkins as a play. Those are some good call outs. I'm a little bit intrigued by the Steelers receivers, which I don't really have any interest in playing Kenny Pickett, but one or the other of Deontay Johnson or George Pickens. Deontay Johnson is just a target monster. Whenever he gets out there, he seems to be targeted a ton. We have him at 13% ownership, 11% chance to be an optimal. George Pickens, after the last game, posts on Instagram, "Free me." Like he apparently is upset with his role for the Steelers. Did you see that should have been touchdown? His foot was like at the midway point of the end zone, and somehow he doesn't get it. He doesn't drag his toe. I don't know what happened there with George Pickens. That was frustrating. But 7% ownership, 12.5% chance of being optimal for George Pickens. Hard not to have interest there just because of what the tools are telling me. It's just he's 5,100, 7% ownership, 12.5% chance of being optimal. Nice matchup with the Packers. So I do have some interest in either one or the other. I don't think I'm playing both of them, but the Packers 25th against the pass in terms of DVOA. I think both of those mid-range options are interesting. My first instinct is Deontay Johnson just because he gets the targets, but George Pickens can make those big plays. On the other side of that game, Christian Watson is 4,900. We have Christian Watson projected for 1.2% ownership. He's like the ultimate boom bust play. Like he has not been getting it done at all, which is why he's down to 1% ownership, but we've got him optimal 3% of the time. So I do like the leverage there for Christian Watson. Somebody that I'll have some interest in. Tank Dell with Nico Collins out obviously looks pretty good. We've got him optimal 12% of the time, 13% ownership. McLaurin in those, you can game stack it if you want to do the Geno Smith. I think Terry McLaurin makes a lot of sense as the bring back there. He does have negative leverage, so I'm probably not playing a ton of him outside of game stacks, but 12% ownership, 9% chance to be an optimal. In my Seattle stacks, I imagine I'll have a good amount of Terry McLaurin as a bring back. Talked about, obviously, if we're playing Geno Smith, Tyler Lockett looks pretty solid. DK Metcalf actually stands out, looks better in the tools. 8% ownership, 11% chance to be an optimal. The other one that I just want to call out is Debo is back this week. So I'm playing some Brock Purdy stacks. I'll definitely have some Debo in those Brock Purdy stacks. He is 6,200. We haven't projected for 3.6% ownership, 4.4% chance to be an optimal. So I do have interest in Debo as well.
Yeah, there's a lot of good-looking contrarian wide receivers this week, and we've hit on the ones that I like the most. DK Metcalf, terrible Commanders defense, correlates with my Geno Smith stacks. And then I'm getting to Tyler Lockett as well. Tyler Lockett's much more popular than DK Metcalf, projected for almost double the ownership. But like guys like DK Metcalf, Trenton Irwin, Rondale Moore, all of those are expected to be contrarian options that I'm overweight to. So that's how I'm differentiating some of the wide receivers that I'm playing. But now let's go ahead and talk about the tight ends. And then after we hit on the tight ends, we'll build some lineups in the lineup generator, and we'll figure out our favorite stacks of the weekend, Neil. But if we go and talk about tight end, it's such a shitty tight end slate. Trey McBride's going to be popular. I'm pretty much in line with the field with him, though, where he's been cheap. He's getting a lot of targets. He's getting an upgraded quarterback with Kyler Murray coming back. So I'm getting to Trey McBride as my most roster tight end on FanDuel and DraftKings. He's going to be popular, but do you have an issue with Trey McBride?
Yeah, no issue with it. He looks fine. We've got him exactly neutral, 15.3% ownership, 15.3% chance to be an optimal. Makes a lot of sense in Kyler stacks. He actually last week he took a little bit of a dip. Let me look up the numbers, but I'm pretty sure he was down in terms of like route participation, which was bizarre. Like he has been taking off, and then last week suddenly only 59% route participation last week. So a little bit of concern there, but Jeff Swaim, the other tight end there in Arizona, is currently questionable. So I prefer McBride if we have Swaim out this week. But regardless, with Kyler returning, he just looks solid at 3,500. I don't really know what happened, why he had a dip in route participation last week, but I think that he's clearly very much in play here. Something that I'm going to have a good amount of. TJ Hawkinson, we got Josh Dobbs there. If Justin Jefferson is out, I'm going to really like TJ Hawkinson, 18% ownership, 19% chance to be an optimal, which I think that we're anticipating Justin Jefferson. Oh, he's already been ruled out this week. So TJ Hawkinson still looks good at 5,000. Sam Laporta in those golf stacks obviously looks good. He's really 5,700. The price tag has come way up, but still makes sense. And then, of course, George Kittle in my talked about how much I like Brock Purdy. I'm going to have George Kittle in some of those Brock Purdy stacks. A lot of it just looks like, to me, it's like I'm probably going to be pairing my tight end with my quarterback a lot of the time, because a lot of my favorite tight ends are also guys that I like the quarterback plays. So I imagine it's going to be a lot of double stacking and including the tight end in the double stack.
Yeah, and then I mean, also if you look, because we got Mike put the ownership up on screen, there isn't like any crazy chalk at tight end. Like nobody's projected for north of 20% ownership. So, I'm playing McBride, who's going to be popular relative to other tight end options, but still ownership in the mid-teens. It's not anything like all that crazy and correlates with some of my, so even if he is going to be the most or second most popular tight end, if I'm playing with Kyler Murray, it's a contrarian lineup. It's not one that many people are going to be on because people aren't playing Kyler Murray. So Trey McBride, I like. And then the rest of the tight ends, TJ Hawkinson's popular. I think it's warranted. Same goes with Evan Ingram. Ingram's too cheap in both FanDuel and DraftKings. The field is getting there. I'm going to be underweight to the field on Dalton Schultz, and I'm going to be underweight to the field on the Texans as a whole. I do think they're going to end up going over-owned based on what happened last week with the massive game that led to lots of just GPP winning onslaught Houston Texans stacks. So I'm going to be underweight to all of the individual Houston pieces, even though I'm overweight to the Bengals on the other side. As far as a contrarian tight end that I like, I am overweight to the field right now on Okonkwo. Okonkwo only projected for 8% ownership. I have double-digit exposure to him, but I'm pretty spread out at tight end, which is not all that. It's not all that uncommon for me. That's usually what I'm looking at when I'm making my lineups.
I think I'm the same way. I think I'm going to be spread out here. I think we've named all the relevant. Logan Thomas is going to be in there. Dalton Schultz, I don't know if I'm going to be underweight there. I don't think I'm going to be too far off the field, regardless of which direction I'm in. But I think he's a fine play, but not somebody that I'm like going crazy over. Kyle Pitts, Jonnu Smith in a great matchup with Arizona. Both look fine. Yeah, I think we've kind of named anybody that I have much interest in. I don't think this like there are weeks where I take big stands at tight end. I don't think this is going to be one of them.
No, I don't have, and so having my lineups built, it's not like I have any tight ends more than 30% of. It's, a bunch of guys that I have in like the 20% range. And then beyond that, these are the players who correlate with my quarterbacks or with my stacks. It's another ugly tight end slate. TJ Hawkinson, still no Justin Jefferson. He's the guy who we currently have projected for the most ownership. At the same time, too, though, it's Josh Dobbs' quarterback. How much faith do we have there? So not really a great tight end slate. There's no Mark Andrews. There's no Travis Kelce. We don't have the studs to look at tight end. I know that Sam Laporta looks like the next coming of a stud tight end, but he's projected for 13% ownership. I have 14% exposure to him, so no real stand for me there on him either. Anything else you want to add here? If not, we'll pull up the lineup generator and build some lineups.
Yes, let's build some lineups.
All right, Mike, pull up the lineup generator. So we'll go and look at some lineups, both DraftKings and FanDuel, and select contrarian lineups because I want to see what ends up looking good for contrarian purposes and see what we might want to play in a tournament for this weekend. And then Neil and I will give out our favorite tournament stack for the weekend. If you guys haven't done it yet, do us a favor, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. If you're interested in signing up for the lineup generator, it is the most cost-effective tool we have over at stochastic.com. Less than $15 and you get access to this. You build lineups for main slates, for all the showdown slates, and it's so easy to use because it builds the lineups for you. So let's go ahead and see what we end up getting. To do all stack types, Mike, but then do contrarian lineups. And we'll do it for DraftKings and FanDuel. So save a handful of them, and then we'll look at the exposures of all the lineups all together. I did see, I saw Kyler Murray, lots of Joe Burrow lineups, handful of Kyler Murray. I think I've seen 3 of them so far.
A lot of the quarterbacks we talked about. I mean, which is not a huge surprise. We're using the same tools.
Yeah. It's just different ways to arrive at similar conclusions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Most stack team by a mile here, Cincinnati Bengals, which, kind of what my lineups look like as well.
42% Irwin is interesting.
42% Irwin, 42% Jamar Chase. We got 47% of Mixon, 52% of Joe Burrow. I have a bunch of lineups that have Burrow and Mixon in them together. Is that anything you have issues with this weekend?
No, not at all. We've seen that win frequently.
Other players in here, I've seen Trey McBride is popping up a whole bunch. There's Keenan Allen as a pay up, Tony Pollard, Evan Ingram. There's some of those Najee Harris lineups. Najee Harris, fairly contrarian at running back. We are getting to more Dalton Schultz in the lineup generator than I got to in the Sims 2, although it's also a different sample size with this being, building 20 lineups as opposed to when I'm building, 10,000 of them in the contest generator. Anything else that stands out to you here?
No, I mean, just the condensation at the top with the Bengals guys was a little bit surprising me to see how condensed it was. But overall, not any huge surprises. The Keenan Allen looked great in the tools. We had some positive leverage there. This is largely just in line with what the tools would. This really is like a way to cheat to get all of our data. Just like sign up $14.95 for the lineup generator. You see exactly who projects the best, who are the best plays in the tools pretty easily for this price tag. It's kind of funny to see how easy it is to get access to all of this information that we spend a lot of time on.
Yeah. And then also, if you ever are looking at one of these lineups and you're like, hey, I want to play this, but maybe I want to switch a player. Well, you could also make switches to the lineups right here by swapping players out, and you can see what their projected ownership is and their fantasy point projection as well. So let's go ahead and build lineups for FanDuel now and see what looks different. Now, one thing I'm going to point out is that my lineups across FanDuel and DraftKings are pretty similar this weekend. Like, I'm getting the same core of quarterbacks. I'm also getting to a lot of the same core of wide receivers as well. So same deal. Let's build contrarian lineups and see what we're getting to for contrarian purposes. But like, could be Travis saying that he's trying to ship a hockey GPP. What's going on?
Nice.
We're trying to ship NFL GPPs.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, let's see what we end up getting to once we build these FanDuel lineups out. I did see a couple of Dak there, still a bunch of Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is going to be our most rostered quarterback here. Yeah, Jamar Chase, Aaron Jones, Buccaneers defense. So defense actually popping up a whole bunch there. Then, yeah, Joe Burrow, most rostered quarterback, getting into about a third of lineups, pairing him with Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon, and there's Trent Irwin down there and over 20% of lineups. So we got a lot of the same looking guys. Like I said, guys that are projecting well on DraftKings, generally projecting well on FanDuel as well.
Yeah, not a huge shock that we're going to have similar players. Obviously, it's not the exact same. Aaron Jones, man, that's a lot of Aaron Jones. But yeah, the price is just too low on FanDuel. Looks good. A lot of players that look good on both sites, obviously.
Yeah, and if you guys want to check out some of those lineups that you can see on the left side, if you guys just want to copy a lineup, I don't recommend you copy this lineup exactly. You should probably swap a player or two because a bunch of people watch the show, and I wouldn't be surprised if these lineups get duped just because of that. And something that goes into figuring out these lineups is, are they going to be duped or not in large field tournaments? But either way, you can look at some of those lineups over there and how to use the tool. And if you ever want to use it for yourself, sign up using that link below. Less than $15 to get access to the lineup generator. Neil, let's go ahead and do our personal favorite stacks of the weekend. If you were only playing one lineup in a large field tournament, or if you're just playing one single entry lineup, what would be the quarterback and the stack combination you go with?
I think I'm going to go with Brock Purdy, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle.
All right. I'm going to go to one that I went to very recently, and it really, really worked out for me. Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson.
Worked out great last time.
Yeah, that's been my my best stack of the season that I've called out so far, because that was like the exact nuts 2 weeks ago. And it's not getting all that much ownership this weekend. It's not like crazy contrary. I'm not saying these guys are like 1 or 2% owned, but Prescott's not all that popular on FanDuel or DraftKings. I think people are a little skittish because of the possibility of the game being a blowout like it was in week 1. It could certainly happen, but maybe this week it's a blowout because the Cowboys release an onslaught via the offense as opposed to the defense, scoring 2 touchdowns, having like 8 sacks, 2 interceptions, and a fumble, whatever it was they did to Daniel Jones in week 1. So Prescott, Lamb, Ferguson, that's my stack for the weekend. Guys, thank you very much for watching. If you've not done it yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Good luck with all your lineups this weekend, and Neil and I will be back next Saturday to break down the Week 11 slate.